Today's episode of In the Trenches is brought to you by System 12 Guitar Method. Sign up today at ryanroxie.com.
In the Trenches with Ryan Roxie.
Hello, and welcome to a very special episode, a live stream episode of In the Trenches. I am your host, Ryan Roxie. We are a couple minutes late, folks. It's all right. Simmer down. It's a little bit rock and roll. I didn't expect it of all the shows to be, technical difficulties and stuff like that. I thought this one would be right on schedule, but it doesn't matter. Everything does work out in the end, right? Just like in rock and roll. And today, folks, it is, like I said, a very special episode for me, and going to be for you, definitely, because on the program today, pretty much the most cerebral guest that we've ever had in the trenches. He's a thinker. And how do I know that? Because I've watched him on many of my favorite podcasts, including Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, and his own podcast called The Portal. So at the end of the day, folks, he's a guitar player as well. So just like you and I, let's warmly welcome into the trenches, Eric Weinstein. Hello, Eric.
Hey, wow, this is an incredible throw. By the way, that was not on Ryan that we're late. It was all on me. I knew I should lay off the Jack Daniels until at least 10 a.m., but, I was a little nervous. This is
You pulled an Axl Rose. I did not expect you pulling an Axl Rose on this, but you know what? It wasn't because you just didn't want to come on. We were desperately working behind the scenes to get all the things technical working, and I think they sound good right now, right? Everything.
Way, I was in the same grade in elementary school as Saul Hudson.
Oh, okay. Dude. I know a lot of stuff about you doing research for this podcast. Oh. I realize that, you know what? You're a little bit older than me by 2 months, actually by 1 month. So
and your hair is fantastic, sir.
Well, thank you very much. Well, the ones down here, up here, it's a little suspect.
Don't talk
it's
about
a little. We
this
can talk about it all. Well, that was the thing that immediately sort of impressed me about you is that, we're both, we can start off with a little bit of going back to get forward. We actually have some animation for that. We're going to dive right into the animation, Eric. What do you think about this show? Because we have it. Why not? We do a little go back to get forward, and part of that is just so we can sample a motorcycle, I think. But I think we're both California guys, both California men, right? Born and raised.
I am.
I was born and raised in the Bay Area. I know you've spent enough time up in the Bay Area, but I want to say you're more SoCal, but I can't be 100% sure.
I am, if not superficial.
I got you. There is that divide. But see, we grew up. This is what's great about you being on the program today is that I feel that we both grew up with the same musical influences, a lot of the same thing. Well, exactly the same things going on in our life during that time. Prop 13. I remember Prop 13 like it was yesterday. I didn't have any idea what it was. I just knew that my parents would talk about it and, have millions of discussions about it. But also the thing is, being that we're the same age, are we now the adults in the room?
Not yet.
I can't accept that.
No. We still have parental supervision now from a 78-year-old president after a 70. He will be. I think he's 78 now, and we had a 74-year-old president. So I think it's very strange that weirdly we are still not the adults in the room.
Wow. But at one point, do you think? I mean, right out of the gate, I'm gonna ask you some questions because you're one of the biggest commentators on. Talk about rock stars, folks. Eric Weinstein is one of the biggest rock stars on the interweb. Whether you want to call it the intellectual dark web, or whether you want to call it he actually named that. That's just one of the many things that he's done. But if you want to talk about all social media, Eric Weinstein is one of our biggest rock stars because of his views. And I really appreciate you coming onto the show to give these views to a whole new audience today. And out of the gate, how old should someone be to run the country?
It's really not. I don't think it. I don't actually have an issue about age. I phrase it about age because it's easier for people to hear, but it's really about the same people having been in charge for way too long. And clearly, we know that they don't have ideas. We know that they are not well adapted to the current world. They're not particularly technically oriented, either because they grew up before technology or they didn't come from technical fields. And we live in a very technical world. So, really, my feeling is that there's no particularly right age, but I do think it would be positive if you expect to live 20 more years to deal with the consequences of your actions in office. And I also think that it's important that if you've been on the stage, let's say our current president became a senator when he was 29 years old in the early 1970s. I'm pretty sure if he had something extremely important to tell us, he would have told us by now. And I feel that the last person in the office had a huge time on the stage. And I don't know why we're continuing to deal with failed leadership.
Well, there you go. I'm just giving you a little bit of a taste of what we're going to talk about today, because at the end of the day, rock and roll, the social media, politics, it all kind of goes around in our complete zeitgeist of where we are today. And I do want to talk a lot about music, because that the theme of the show does have a music sort of thread through it. And the fact of the matter is, I was turned on to you because obviously I've seen you commentate on the Joe Rogan. I've seen you with Sam Harris. I've seen you with Jordan Peterson. I've literally watched hours and hours of interviews, just looking at listening to your views, and being really impressed by what I hear. And I think my rock and roll audience needs to hear a lot of your views as well. But out of the gate, I know that there's a little bit of misconception about how to introduce you at one point, because, when I was trying to get the description for the podcast, I mean, some people, Dave Rubin, for instance, introduces you as a mathematician. Wikipedia says you're a venture capitalist. Logan Paul, who you had the balls to go on that podcast with, that was an interesting show as well, but you did a great job on it. His description is that you're a genius atheist Christian, whatever that means. So, I mean, how would you describe yourself and to people? And I know you get asked this question quite a lot, but just in sort of, I guess, Cliff Notes form, how would you describe yourself?
Well, I went with imposter when I was on Dave Rubin, and I kind of like that, because I think that distinguishing between an imposter and a fraud is important to me. An imposter is somebody who may not have the credentials to be in a particular location, but has every intention of doing as good of a job as they can, if not better than the credentialed. So you may steal from the till, but you hopefully are going to put back more than you took by the time the day is over. A fraud is somebody who's just trying to fool you in an attempt to enrich themselves and screw you over. I think that part of why I do that is because we've become extremely worried about anyone deviating from his or her lane. So you hear "stay in your lane" a lot these days. And with open architecture of the internet, polymaths are particularly terrifying to people, because they may roam around and opine in areas where they are not expert. And you, of course, have an issue there where you get a benefit from the fact that the person isn't usually captured by the dominant belief structure in that area, but that person has to pay it back by virtue of the fact that they are not, in fact, dedicated experts who stay only there. So in some sense, Ryan, not to be critical, you are an imposter as a broadcaster.
I was just going to say I'm a podcast imposter, but I do intend, I don't wish, I intend to actually become one of the best, at least in my rock and roll field. So, and I'm listening to guys like you on your podcast, The Portal, to sort of grab tips every single episode.
Well, let me just say one other thing about the concept of the imposter. I've realized that a lot of the world's genius is riding on female shoulders, and that women, by and large, have a bigger issue with imposter syndrome because they don't give themselves the same allowances generically to screw up. And so for a while, I was going around talking about the need to not worry about imposter syndrome. And I don't know that I was very effective. But by embracing the imposter label, one of the hopes was that as a positive externality, a lot of people would say, okay, maybe I'm an imposter too. Now I don't have to worry about imposter syndrome. So the secret agenda behind calling myself an imposter is that if we could liberate the amount of intellectual horsepower that's currently inhibited by virtue of people saying, stay in your lane, or you don't know the topic, and you're jawing off, you're a bullshitter, all of that kind of energy, imagine what the world could be like. So if people started to think of imposter as a wonderful thing, taking a name like as was done for the word queer and spinning it around and turning it into a positive, then I thought that I could do no greater good in the world than to free up all of the people who've been inhibited and have not taken their shot on goal.
Imposter is no longer a pejorative, folks. Imposter is a good thing. And with that being said, Eric, would you consider yourself an imposter guitarist?
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. I mean, I think you contacted me after. I think nobody had seen me post myself with an electric guitar ever. So
first one.
Yeah. So I had a Mexican Strat and an old Princeton Chorus amp, which was not the right amp for me. And I then got a Positive Grid Spark amp on an impulse, and I took my my guitar in to get it worked on. And holy cow, I had suffered for decades in a situation where I could have made myself happy with under $300, and I just didn't know it.
Well, how did the guitar find you? I mean, did it find you at a young age?
It's a horrible story.
Then please do tell.
It has to do with my grandfather, and I was musically hopeless. And I have a child who's musically hopeless and another one that's musically gifted. The musically hopeless child, we could not teach him middle C to save. As soon as we taught him middle C, and then we taught him D and E above it, he would forget middle C. And it has to do with various learning issues in the family. And so I took 6 months of piano lessons, which is a total disaster. Nothing happened. And it had to do a lot with symbolic uptake. So my grandfather, who was musical, said, I want to get Eric a guitar. And my mom said, nothing doing. You're going to destroy his self-confidence. There's no ability. And he said, okay, all he needs to do is tune it, and then I'll be happy. He doesn't need to play it. So that was his way around. So he got me a nylon string guitar, which I brought just in case I needed to document this.
I love it. Please do.
And I learned to tune it, and then I started wondering how it worked. And theory became my way in. So I couldn't read music, and I didn't know how to do tablature. Everything symbolic is a huge drain on my brain. Like if I do symbols, I have to sleep for hours. It's really quite horrible.
But wasn't setting the goal for yourself to tune the guitar, that was a major sort of thing that perhaps maybe your grandfather gave it to you as a challenge?
Devious. He was being devious. He was trying to get around my mom because my mom had an idea in her head that this is just going to be bad. And my grandfather understood that if he could get the guitar into my hands, then I would find my own path. So he was the self-teacher who teaches self-teachers how to self-teach.
Well, you have an interesting approach with that. You have an interesting approach to learning music and to teaching. I think, it goes against sort of the educational complex, if you will. You have, I know you've talked about it before, and like, there is that old saying that repetition does learn something, and that whole 10,000 hours to learn something, but you necessarily don't agree with that.
Well, that's somebody's process. So we're not knocking it. It works. But it's not everybody's process. And then if it's not your process, do you take away from that you're less than and deficient? And that's my issue. And it's funny because I now hang out with musicians who are way above my pay grade. And I don't think they even realize how discouraging what they say can be. For example, somebody recently said, you're not a guitarist until you sell one guitar to make rent, and then you buy it back at a later date or something like this. And
Wow.
I
Okay.
couldn't relate to that because I've never had any of these experiences. Or you're not a guitarist until a string breaks and you compensate for it and such and such. Well, all of these things are okay. Great. I'm not a guitarist, and that I have this idea in my mind
Makes
that
you
I'm
feel
not
lower.
Yeah, well, because you don't realize that people are listening in on your conversation. And if you think about great pedagogues, Guthrie Govan or Paul Gilbert, these people who are amazing. If you're not in that idiom, you think, well, okay, I'm not a guitarist. I'm just somebody who owns a guitar. I'm a guitar owner. That's what I am, and I think that that's one of the things I've been talking about recently with Rick Beato, if you follow his channel at all.
Absolutely, we do. Yeah.
And so I've been saying, why don't you guys recognize that a lot of us don't know where we are? We're certainly above some level, but we're below other levels. It's not that we've had a linear progress. And bringing the non-guitar guitar community, for example, in, because we watch these shows and can I just say this? The greatest delight for me is I'm sitting theoretically in the seat where Nita Strauss and Joe Satriani.
Joe Satriani. Yeah, Joe Satriani was right there, and he was in the same state, and Nita Strauss as well. She was just on last week. We had a really cool band meeting for those of you that are in the chat right now, because we do have a live chat, and I haven't done this, because we were so bogged down with getting the show started. I didn't really give credit where credit's due. Our live chat over on the Ryan Roxie YouTube official channel. We're very happy to have you in there. Thank you very much. We appreciate you for listening to the audio broadcast, which is Spotify and Apple Podcasts and Stitcher and all those. We really appreciate it. But we have Eric Weinstein on the program here. You want to get in our live chat right now, just hit that subscribe button. And you're in that same position that Joe Satriani. In fact, that I think was one of the selling points to getting you on this show.
Well, no. It scared the living crap out of me. I have such respect for these people that, one of the things you have to understand is that we who don't play in that idiom and at that level, we are very respectful, I think, in general. It's not a Dunning-Kruger thing. But on the other hand, you have to connect to those people. Like, you may know that you're not Jimi Hendrix, but when you pick up a Strat, it has special significance because that Strat has been imbued with mystique and mysticism. It's a talisman. It's something magical and wonderful. It's one of the reasons that I'm so focused on, we have to get our great musical instrument companies. I mean, Fender, Gibson, PRS, all these, Positive Grid. I'm really excited about getting people to reacquaint themselves with the magic of music that isn't coming through a computer, but is coming through your fingers.
We are so much on the same page, so much and so that I actually have put together during this whole pandemic. I was working on it before, and I was going to actually have it come out later on in the 2020 tour before everything got that trigger word road for us. But I call it, and the whole team here that works on In the Trenches, as well as the Roxy Guitar Army, we call it the System 12 Guitar Method. And my whole point of putting together is that you should be able to learn the guitar within 12 weeks. It's a 12 lesson course. And I don't think that guitar or any instrument is as hard to learn as the teachers make it, as the institutions make it, as anybody says it is, because it is easier than you think, as long as you know a lot of the sort of life hacks, guitar hacks. And I was able to put all the sort of, guitar hacks of my years of playing into this course. And I know that you've learned more than just guitar this way, and in sort of shortcuts ways. You've also learned harmonica, right?
Sort of. I mean, the thing about it is that my nightmare is like Sugar Blue is out there listening. This guy doesn't play harmonica,
Oh, I saw you on Rogan. It sounded great, dude. And I'm not sure if you.
I saw that you guys used "You Gotta Move."
Yes.
It was a beautiful touch.
It was like an inside thing, and I was hoping that you get it, but
Oh, dude.
now you got it. Good.
No, I was all over that. And it really, the funny thing is that I probably have never really had a conversation about a song like You Gotta Move, because I read about these things, and I know that people who are in the music business talk about, the old blues cats and jazz guys. But in general, in my life, nobody knows the music I listen to. So I never have conversations about Big Bill Broonzy. I mean, there's no sense of being part of a culture. I'm completely isolated.
I did not know that the Rolling Stones covered that song on Sticky Fingers. Did you?
Get your yayas out, it occurs.
There it is. I love it. All right. So that being said, because we are sort of the same age group, we're sort of the same era, same state. What were the bands that you were listening to growing up that really made you go, yeah, I like this music?
Oh, geez. Well, the one that got me for guitar, Robbie Krieger of The Doors on the song Spanish Caravan, took Isaac Albeni's piano music, which the Asturias Leyenda, and I guess Segovia had transcribed it for guitar, and he used that as this motif. And I've never heard anything. It's very close, actually, to Crazy Train in a certain sense, the main riff from the beginning of that. And well, no, I think this is super important, the way in which the profane and the sacred interact in rock and roll. I mean, of course, Ray Charles did this with What Did I Say, with the church music and the moaning and groaning. And I think maybe my favorite example of this, which I talk about sometimes, is AC/DC's You Shook Me All Night Long, is very close to the most powerful sort of, prayer or recitation in Judaism, the Shema. Right? Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Ehad. Yeah, you shook me all night long. I can't hear because of
it shook me all night long in Hebrew. I love it.
Well, but think about the guys from Kiss, I mean, Israelis, right?
Absolutely.
So there's a weird way in which all of this discussion about sex and drugs and rock and roll and church and transcendence and, it's all wrapped up in the same thing. And it's not all about the rock and roll lifestyle as this gutter thing. It's also about the transcendence of the gutter and the way in which those two things collide. So I think that was it was very important to me. The Doors were big. I didn't get AC/DC in real time. I'm now a huge fan, but back then I thought it was really stupid. It was going to be a passing fad, so that clearly got that one wrong. Aerosmith was pretty large for me. I'd get into
Aerosmith 1 or Aerosmith version 2. See, because I always find that the version 1 for me, just like the Bon Scott AC/DC version, they're closer to my heart.
Rocks, Toys in the Attic.
Right. Those are all the Jack Douglas produced albums, but there are versions too of both those bands. If basically, after Highway to Hell, there's, what was the album? Oh my God. The Black Album, the biggest one, Hell's Bells, Back in Black. Sorry. That album, it was a whole new era because of Brian Johnson singing. And then with Aerosmith right around a couple years later, but when they started writing more pop hits, that was almost another version of Aerosmith as well.
Something that was really big for me was X. And X never really made it the way I was expecting them to make it. I went back and listened to Johnny Hit and Run Pauline, which I thought was incredibly witty and extremely disturbing. Do you know that song?
Yeah, X was one of those bands that would be constantly played on KRQR in Los Angeles. And I would spend, KROQ. Was it KROQ? Yeah.
KROQ.
That's right. And I would go down to Los Angeles and Huntington Beach during the summers because that's where my mom's family all lived. I lived in the Bay Area, but that's where I was turned on to surf punks, the Missing Persons, and X, of course, and Plimsoll. So these were all bands that were being played always on K-Rock. So I guess you grew up in that scene as well.
That's true, but a lot of it was sneaking into clubs back then. I left California when I was 16, so all of my California experiences had to be 16 and younger, which doesn't make any sense if I think about it. I was really into George Thorogood, but my friends were listening to Elvis Costello or the Cars, and and then there were bands that didn't make it, things that I thought were stupid then, but I think are sort of more interesting now. I do think that there was a lot of energy that one of the things I've been discussing recently is the way in which the blues has to animate a lot of what rock and roll is, or it becomes this other thing that I'm not sure how to relate to. That in essence, the blues has such a minimal set of expectations that it gives you a lot of blank. Well, that's sort of the whole point. Or
12 bars.
It could be one chord.
Yeah, true.
Right.
True.
And sometimes it could be one string. If you've ever seen John Lee Hooker live, he could play, quite a bit, but he could also just get it down to one string, and he could hold your attention. I think that because it clears out so much, it gives you the maximal amount of blank canvas. It's weirdly almost the most musically interesting because it's not telling you very much about what to do. And so in the hands of Stevie Ray Vaughan or Gary Moore or Jimi Hendrix or whatever, you get this idea of somebody in a direct communication with the universe. They're just jacked into the cosmos. And particularly in the sort of virtuosic idiom. And I guess that for me has to deal with maximal emotion. And what worries me a little bit is that I think we have, in some sense, better guitarists now than we've ever had. And we're not choosing to listen to them in the same way, with the same reverence and the same attention. And I think this is something to worry about.
Is it because of the platforms that they're presented on? Could it be because we have so much accessibility with YouTube? And I do want to talk about YouTube, Spotify, and the whole difference. Whereas these older classic artists, they're on vinyl. You recognize them, you remember them from being vinyl, cassette tape artists.
Well, and you have an exact idea of how your record was scratched. Okay, here we're coming up to that pop, right? No, I think this is important. It was a particular instance. Somebody said that a photograph isn't a photograph until you print it out and put it in a frame. Because what we do now is we have files, and we don't treat them as photographs. We just take a ton of files and we say, okay, that's my album. But you haven't actually done what is necessary to activate that file and to create a photograph out of it. I think
something tangible, maybe,
in a certain sense. And then there are other paradoxes. I think one of the paradoxes that I find very funny is that I'm not positive that Eddie Van Halen would have been Eddie Van Halen without David Lee Roth, because David Lee Roth put Eddie Van Halen in a package that particular genius was, well, to use a computer science term, David Lee Roth was the syntactic sugar for Eddie Van Halen. And that with stage clothes and leaps and songs that are danceable, you would have a situation where many more people would hear that person than would hear John Petrucci.
You don't know how happy I am to be breaking down these old school songs and music with someone, because you have such a rich knowledge with the backstory of your views about this type of music and stuff.
I'm gonna get slaughtered in your comments, by the way.
No, you're not. You're gonna get. Honestly, you're gonna get a lot of praise because you have the knowledge of it, and you've actually really thought it out. Which, again, from the top of the show, I said you're one of the more deep thinkers that we've had in the trenches. Although there's lots of stories that we haven't, and I've found that all the guests that come on our show do have a story to tell. A lot of inspiring, working their way all the way up to where they're at.
Scratch a musician, find a geek. I mean, I think that's a very important idea, is that you have all these people who are sort of the height of cool, but if you hang out with them, they're talking about their impedance issues in their amps,
Oh yeah, yeah. We
Oh,
can we can all. I actually have a system. I'm not going to use it with you though. We have Gear Geeks and Guitar Freaks where we just break down certain types of things. And
You're on
no,
your
I'm
own,
not
my
going to
friend.
talk. I'm not going to break down your Mexican made Strat right now. Although it did look very cool in the actually ad picture and stuff. But folks, we're here with Eric Weinstein, and there it is. There's a nice picture of it. My question is music the only thing left that isn't divisive anymore? Because I see,
It's totally divisive.
well, but when you talk about a fan group,
Yeah.
because with my boss, with Alice, I have the most conservative and most progressive audience all in one room at any given time, at any given city, watching the show. Everybody dialed in to the music, dialed into the sound. So I'm saying in that respect, is it the only thing that we can all agree on if we like a certain type of music anymore?
Well, it has a very special. I guess I disagree with it because I've gotten into such brutal arguments about. You can get into an argument about which is the greatest guitarist in the Yardbirds with the Yardbirds fans, and it can get pretty heated. I think that I think music has a very special place in keeping society together, like comedy does, and that we don't. In part, we allow these two things to sneak up, and we treat them as somewhat frivolous. But I'm very worried about this particular moment. I keep making this point over and over again that I don't think the music of our age is the music of our age. I don't think that the music we're listening to now is what we're supposed to be listening to. I think if you think about what's going on in society, the inability of our musicians to figure us out and hold up to us what we can't see in ourselves. Comedy lagged for a while. I think comedy is catching up, but there was a period of time where comedians couldn't figure out how to tell a joke on a college campus without getting shut down.
Because they had a hard time actually doing what they do.
Yeah, and I think Joe Rogan sort of said that to me that it was rough for a little while, and then it became the golden age as the best people started pulling off the William Tell shots. And I recently heard this song. Young friend of mine, Sam Comfort, turned me on to Polyphia and this song Goat. And I just freaked out after a while. I mean, it was so beautiful and so fractured, and the virtuosity was sort of done as a throwaway. And you know the song?
No, I haven't heard it yet.
It'll
I'm gonna
blow
check
your
it
mind,
out.
I think. I hope.
All
And
right. Well,
and in so doing, it reminded me like, okay, well, this actually sounds like the music of my time. It's hyper complex. It's treated as if it's sort of in the gutter. I think it's filmed in a church, but it's dusty, and it's simple, complicated, virtuosic, and it's like the guys couldn't even bother to get dressed for the shoot.
well, by the way, I'm happy you do disagree with me because it is sort of a rite of passage. If I would have gone with a whole Eric Weinstein episode without you disagreeing with me, I'd feel something was wrong, and that's good because
Sorry, I'm not. When I say I'm disagreeable, it's not that I generally think that music should bring us together, but I think that actually it is weirdly falling down on the job.
well, I agree very much in that sense where I've been thinking for a long time, especially with 2020, there couldn't be a better time for a new rebellious Sex Pistols or Guns N' Roses or Nirvana to come out. And the crazy thing is, I mean, this is what I was going to ask you about. There's a new song that I have, what's his name? Tom McDonald. I think that's what it is. Where did I have it in my notes right here? Have you heard Fake Woke or any of those types of things? Yeah. Okay. So
Well,
that
that's
to
pretty
me,
direct. Yeah.
it's very direct, but I was expecting a Guns N' Roses, Nirvana sort of screw the system. I didn't expect it to come from a guy from Canada calling out both sides and then one side championing it as their own,
And but I would also love to see more indirect pot shots. Like it took a lot of courage to say it, but the way in which I don't know, you know the old story about waist deep in the big muddy was actually about Vietnam and becoming entangled in Southeast Asia. You know, there's a way of using metaphor and indirection in music that I think is incredibly powerful. You know, the same way that High Noon isn't really a Western, it's actually about like the McCarthy era. You know, in a weird way, one of the things about music is that it's not necessarily about what it says it's about. And, you know, I think about the way in which, exactly, you know, we're dealing with WAP at the moment. And, you know, is that more shocking than ZZ Top singing Pearl Necklace? I don't know. You know, in a weird way, the layers of indirection actually make things more shocking.
Well, you do have your finger on the pulse of a lot of, and that's what I appreciate you doing, is that you say you give your insights to a bunch of different podcasts and platforms. I mean, obviously you're one of those intellectuals that have, you know, you're one. I've seen you again with Jordan Peterson have some really cogent conversations, and you know it. I like watching that as a high level, but at the same time, you also went on to the Logan podcast, and you were defending basically what was the story that the person that you defended? It was a Riley Reid, and you made a really great argument about, you know, her being a successful businesswoman that was getting sort of, you know.
Well, I mean, I had her on my podcast as a guest.
You did?
Immediately after Roger Penrose. And I thought that, you know, I found out that she was a Sam Harris fan. And I think that that sex work is an incredibly important sector of our economy to be looking at. And to have people who are thoughtful presented, you know, as my producer at the time said, everybody basically flirts with her when they have her on the show. And I had no interest in doing that. I really wanted to talk about where she was as a business person, as somebody targeted in her business so that she couldn't have business relationships. There's a whole issue about commercial banking, about Operation Choke Point. I'm very concerned about the way in which OnlyFans and Seeking Arrangement are targeting young women who don't have incredible economic prospects. I both want sex work not shamed, nor do I want to pretend that this is all just normal and fine. So these are very difficult issues. And you know, to your point, I was in it for the fart jokes when I went on Logan, but Logan's no dummy. You know, he's a smart guy, and he's a big brand in part because it's a combination of zany stupidity and cleverness, and understanding where the zeitgeist is. So I think that I don't know if I take the intellectual label so seriously. I do think that it's really just important to be a full human being and to try to evidence all aspects of that.
Well, I'm just happy that you're in the same seat as Joe Satriani and you're not speaking out of the same mic that Riley made famous. So that's an inside joke for those of you that want to go down that Logan rabbit hole. They will. But you do know a lot about economy, finances, because you've been working with the Thiel, Peter Thiel, for many years. You guys have a financial group
before that, and did work in economics using gauge theory, coming from physics to try to redo what was called the marginal revolution. So there's an interest in markets because markets are what stitch us together.
Do you find that now that whole field helps you with your podcast and helps you with everything that you do now online?
No,
not at all.
Not really. You know, I think we're all obsessed with money in a way that's really dysfunctional at the moment because the market isn't working as well as it used to. And as a result, people who can figure out how to get the market to work for them have taken on you know, it used to be lots of people could get the market to work well enough for them. And I think that increasingly we don't find it very interesting if you're not absolutely crushing it. On the other hand, a lot of the people who are actually crushing it are really finding defects in the market and exploiting them, not necessarily productively. So I think it's really, I'm worried about our building a golden calf out of people who are succeeding in this particular market. I think that this incarnation of the market is not my favorite. In particular, I don't like guessing games about what is the Fed going to do next? What's happening in China? Do you think the data is real? That's not as interesting as, I mean, it's interesting if you can play it and make money, but it's not interesting intrinsically to think about what's in the head of particular players as opposed to what's going on in innovation in general, or financial inclusion or financialization. I'm more attached to trying to figure out if the market still really reflects us, or is the market breaking down in late stage capitalism?
I tried to figure out technical trading I invested 2.5 years of my life doing it. And after that 2.5 years, I realized it wasn't for me, because it takes a lot more sheer, you don't have to pardon the expression, but it takes balls to be a technical trader.
That's true. I think it's also the case that a lot of us are devalued by virtue of the fact that we have skills that the market doesn't yet recognize as valuable. And so there's the whole issue, I talk a lot about public goods. Public goods are things for which price and value are not kept together. And if you produce a lot of value, but you can't capture the value because of some market defect, then the market sort of views you as a loser. And one of the things that's really important is how much talent is currently miscast as loser in our current system. And I think if we don't watch that, it's going to be a revolution. I think that the number of incredibly talented people who have so much to give the world and who are so appreciated, who cannot capture the value that they create, is an international scandal that people are afraid to talk about, because if you complain about it, it must be that you're a loser. And so one of the things that I'm interested in is representing the loser community. I think that there's more talent in the loser pile than there is in the winner pile, by far. And a lot of that is a mistake when you see somebody who's just incredible, like a musician. How many? If you think about Mark Knopfler, singing about down in the tunnel trying to make it pay, and you think about all of the great musicians. Think about Joshua Bell's famous experiment where he was playing the violin in a metro station, and people could listen to one of the most sought-after violinists in the world and just walk right by him. I used to watch Tracy Chapman playing and singing in the arches of the Harvard Cooperative, the Coop, in Cambridge, and it used to break my heart. I would think, gosh, this unfortunate woman, she's such a talent.
She could just catch a break.
She could just catch a break. And, it's like your feet from Tracy Chapman. And it was clear. Now, if you take all of those people, like Eva Cassidy, why isn't Eva Cassidy a billionaire? Why wasn't she during her lifetime? That talent, Jesus, every time I put it on, I just come apart. And the fact that the market can't reward this stuff, in particular what happened to music when music became files, because a file is inexhaustible. You can play it any number of times, and the zeros and ones don't degrade the way vinyl does. And it's inexcludable, because if there's no encryption on it, you can share it 1,000,000 times. It constitutes a public good. And so musicians were some of the first people to get royally screwed by the so-called abundance economy. And, this is one of the things that's really important. What saves music is the ability to tour. Why? Because you can lock people out of a hall, and when it's over, it's over. And so those things allow you guys to charge for your services. But I want to get back to the point where we can charge for music, and we can, at some level, say thank you through the market for the fact that you've written the soundtrack of our lives.
That is important. I think that for so many musicians, we forget that we're in the music business. And that's the biggest problem, because we have such a mind to create and to be artistic, not realizing that there are X's and O's that can actually be just as artistic if we could just take the time. There's a few rock stars out there that can do that, but not everyone.
but part of the problem is that when you start having to talk about money, you degrade the experience, right? You know, do you know Suzanne Santo? She's been on Joe Rogan with Gary Clark Jr.
I do not. I've not heard of it. Sorry.
Well, try listening to a song like "Ghost in My Bed." It's just this haunting Americana of love in the gutter and its beauty and grace. And she has got one of the most haunting voices backed by her violin or guitar. And she was a friend of mine, and she came over, you know, and she gave us this concert in the little yard outside my house. And I just thought, like, how can I repay you? How can I possibly find a way in kind of saying to you how much this means to me? And there's no way of doing it, you know, and then you cheapen it by sort of trying to put a dollar on it. If you guys have to talk about money, then we don't have the same feeling, because you're singing about love, you're singing about heartache, you're singing about defeat. You know, I think about people who've pulled it off, like Tom Petty singing "I Won't Back Down," you know. And
he went up against all the record companies back in the day.
Yeah, you know, the A&R man says, "I don't hear a single. The future's wide open." And you know, the song I want to be played onto if I ever make it to the Tonight Show is "Baby Even the Losers." I love that song. Absolutely. I think that stuff is it's so important. So if you think about you know, That Ain't Working, That's the Way You Do It, Mark Knopfler's, musicians want to talk about this fact of we're screwed. Do you know
there's hints in there, and you're saying right now the music that people are listening to is not the music that people should be listening to, because maybe there should be more of that, a little bit of rebellious kick in the ass sort of, but a little bit underslighted sort of lyrics.
You know, the things they do look awful cold when I look at our politicians, right? The ability to take a glancing line like that and not have to say the whole damn thing. The irony of that. I think you have to look at the fact that musicians are our historians as well. I mean, one of the things that I bring up now a few times when I talk about music is the number of musicians in the 60s who were talking against the protest movements. We're saying, you guys are kind of out of control and you're not really making sense. And so those kids were their audience, but they were also chiding their audience. You know, I'd love to change the world, but I don't know what to do, so I'll leave it up to you.
Who was the last band that did something like that? Who was the last band that had a stand like that? Can you say Pearl Jam?
So I don't know the reason. By the way, the last person who did this really effectively was Dave Chappelle, who said, you know, I'm going to do an impression, and he goes into this thing about, I'm going to ruin you, I'm going to destroy you, blah, blah, blah. Now, who am I? Everybody said, Trump. And he said, no, it's you, the audience. You know, by the way, Green Day's I Hope You Had the Time of Your Life, that little FU, you know, at some level.
Yeah, it's sarcastic, but the point taken.
It's sarcastic to everyone. We're all wasting our lives, right? I mean, I think that they were including themselves in on the joke. If you look at the video for that, Good Riddance, it's incredibly self-reflective. I think that in large measure, we in general are scared to say how off everything is. We are frittering away everything that we had built up. We are not passing things along to the next generation. And it's so important to me that I'm writing songs now about people who are freezing eggs and can't make the payments. The way in which young men are not able to inspire young women and are dithering around, not forming families, and the way in which we're also caught up in this moment. And you know, in some sense, how do you write a new song? How do you? I'm just struggling.
What rhymes with freezing eggs? Hot legs. I don't know.
Well, showing some leg and freezing my eggs, because OnlyFans is going to be the solution to the problem of not being able to make the payments. So there's that.
Damn it! You've got it half written already. All right, perfect. Can you hang out with us for a couple more minutes? We're going to take a really quick break because you've been talking about the System 12. We talked about it earlier, and because we have Eric Weinstein here. Pleasure to have you on the podcast. Vic, if you can run a little bit of System 12 commercial for us, and we'll come back with Let the People Speak. Thank you very much for being on the podcast, Eric.
Thank you.
Hello, folks. Ryan Roxie here, and thanks for watching and supporting all things we are doing over here at the RGA, otherwise known as the Roxie Guitar Army headquarters. We'd like to invite you to start your own guitar journey with the most comprehensive and easy-to-learn course that's out there today, the System 12 Guitar Method. I've taken my 40-plus years of experience of playing guitar and combined it with some of the best tech and guitar life hacks to come up with a system that'll get you playing not just the guitar, but entire songs in a very short time. Check out the links provided and make sure to enjoy the lessons. And of course, enjoy the ride. Now, back to the show. We try to keep it all quick here. And honestly, we try to accept when it comes to our guests because, folks, today with us, we have Eric Weinstein, guitarist, pianist, harmonicist, but he's an imposter at all three.
Thank you.
But an imposter.
Mandolin. If you really want to talk imposter, it's mandolin. But I'll tell you something. I'm so excited about octave mandolins. We've got to get those into our world.
Okay.
Do you know about them?
You sound a little bit like my friend Eric Dover, because he would be the guy. Eric Dover played in Jellyfish, and he does a lot of solo stuff work, just a genius musician. But whenever I would call him, we would be talking, he'd be like, he would be out sort of recording birds and sort of looking at new sounds and techniques. And so I like that. It's the octave mandolin. We should look into that.
Well,
okay.
So yeah, just think about tuning in fifths, but with enough room that your fingers can actually fit on a fretboard. I don't know why people didn't invent this earlier.
Bet heavy, go heavy on octave mandolins. That's your financial advice now.
They traded at a discount. They're very hard to find.
Well, you know what? There's people in our chat room right now. I guarantee know people that know people. So here we are in the trenches. We have another little bit of animation, but honestly, these are questions from just a couple from our guests that have been in the chat. Our producer, Vic, has been compiling them, and it's a little segment we call Let People Speak. There you go. The lambs. Our first question, though, and you might know the band, the London Choir Boys. It comes from the lead guitarist of the London Choir Boys, Guy Griffith. He's been on the podcast before, a good friend of mine. He actually emailed me this morning, and he was like, I'm so happy you're having Eric on the podcast. Yes. How do we end the charge of the woke brigade, and how long before they start trying to cancel rock and roll?
All right. I mean, let's get me canceled by answering this question. By the way.
Dive into it.
Nice trap. I think we have to realize two things. One is that we have to realize that woke had a point, and that if you want to defeat woke, you're going to have to listen to the point and not listen to the implementation that is trying to destroy anyone who refuses to see the point exactly the way the woke brigade does. So, for example, when I talked about being in the same seat as Nita Strauss and Joe Satriani,
yes,
Nita Strauss is incredibly hot. Hot is part of the appeal, just the way it was true for Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen was hot. I may be straight as the day is long, but sexuality and desire are inextricably woven through rock and roll. And if you can't talk about the fact that, Bonnie Raitt to me is incredibly hot. And Samantha Fish, who I didn't even know Samantha Fish existed. Holy cow, can this gal play the guitar and sing? We have to start realizing that part of the pleasure of being a human being has to do with theater. And the theater of rock and roll, of leather pants and, we were talking before about Steven Tyler's scarves and the microphone stand and all this stuff.
David Lee Roth and all his.
Right. The pageantry and the fantasy life is in part very important to our reality. So fantasy and reality are supposed to be intertwined. Now, a lot of bad things used to happen backstage. If you go backstage at a modern rock concert, you can take your kid there for the most part. I don't know if the lawyers got there. I don't want to see random destruction, but I also don't want to see the thing completely sanitized. And, you know, I tell the story about Buddy Guy going into the women's room with an incredibly long guitar cord, following this hot gal who disappeared in there. And then when she discovered that he was in there, she screamed, and he mimicked every scream on the guitar. That was not safe. It wasn't safe. And it wasn't, you know, if you had to defend that, you'd hear the nightly news story, you know, it's just like, in a surprising incident, Buddy Guy entered a women's room, you know, creating an unsafe situation. On the other hand, that woman was laughing. It was probably, you know, one of the great moments of her life. She came out of it in a different way. Now, there's no way to figure out, was that actually safe? Because it wasn't actually safe. On the other hand, was it actually dangerous? I'm not really sure that it was actually all that dangerous either. What we're now trying to do is come up with rules rather than taste as the arbiter of whether something is good or bad. And it's completely randomly distributed. I was in Trader Joe's and people were playing Brown Sugar. You know, well, do you ever?
If they only knew, right? If they only knew.
Lyrics or Some Girls. I mean, like, if somebody ever goes back to Some Girls, boy, we're all toast.
Has technology sanitized rock and roll, even though all the doors that it's open? Because there is this weird relationship that you say with rock and roll music or just general music and technology. It's open doors, giving us wider audiences, but it's also sort of made everything much more sanitized, like you said.
But you know, in part, the longing, you know, the way in which we play at being men and women, when in fact we're much closer to each other than we care to admit. I think that, you know, in a weird way, rock and roll exaggerated some of those differences theatrically in order to explore things through the safety of the stage. Most of us were away from that. You know, you don't end up backstage at a rock concert usually by accident, and you probably have some idea that, you know, you're dipping into space that's a bit dangerous. So I think that there's a really difficult issue, which is that rock and roll is not supposed to be safe, nor is it supposed to be hell on earth. You know, I think that if you look at the scene in Almost Famous, that will break everyone's heart, the poker game or whatever that was.
Wow, you remember that scene? Yeah.
Who can forget that scene, because it's so effing disturbing, you know? So you have to both reckon with the fact that the woke brigade has a point, and the fact that taking the fun and danger out of life is not the right way to explore that point. And you have to give us music that's worth taking risks over. I think it's, you know, in part, this is what has me trying to write music, which is, how do I up my game? If I'm going to bitch about this stuff, how do I scream about love, sex, desire, hope, fear, failure, all of the things that animate us, and put it into some kind of incredibly toxic cocktail that I can mainline into my veins? You know, that's what the soul of rock and roll is to me.
What are you writing your songs on now? What instrument are you writing your songs on? Guitar, piano, or harmonica, or is it octave mandolin?
I don't have an octave mandolin. I tried to buy one. There was one mandolin in all.
We're working on it. We're working on it in the chat to get Eric Weinstein an octave mandolin. But hold on, what are you writing your songs on?
Yeah, I mean, on this guitar, actually, you know, a classical, because it has enough. I don't know how to play with a pick. I realized 2 weeks ago that I didn't know how to play with a pick when this guy, George Marios, who's the guitarist for Pineapple Thief, did an entire video lesson just for me. And I was embarrassed that I realized I have no idea how to use a plectrum.
All right. There you go. I'm giving this to you virtually right now, because, you know, a plectrum is one of those things where, here's an interesting thing. Are you left-handed or right-handed?
Right-handed.
Okay. So in a sense, you play guitar traditionally right-handed, right?
Yeah.
But my theory is that you're doing it wrong. And because I'm left-handed, and everyone always asks me, they say, "Oh, you're left-handed. Doesn't that mean why don't you play guitar left-handed?" Well, here's my theory. When guitar first started, in back in the day, classical music was the left hand was pretty much stationary, and your right hand, which you needed all the coordination in, did all the arpeggios and all the finger picking for it. But with the introduction of the guitar pick, it sort of switched, because all of a sudden this hand just goes up and down, and as you know, for, you know, us guys,
I've never heard anyone say this, and I've always wondered about it.
So being that this hand goes up and down, and that's all it does, and there's some that do it faster than others, all your really technical and coordination stuff is going up and down the neck, because at that point, with the evolution of the guitar, and guys like Paul Gilbert, Yngwie Malmsteen, when they just started riffing up and down, they all of a sudden this hand became much more important. So I always tell people, if you're left-handed and you're playing traditional, you're doing it the right way. And
fantastic.
You've never ever heard of a left-handed piano. That's the other thing.
That's a really interesting point. Wow.
There you go. If I gave you something to think about, damn it, I feel like I've accomplished something huge in this.
This is huge for me. Right?
Well, we are going to move on. And actually, that wasn't a trap question by Guy Griffith. That actually, you answered it very eloquently. I think
it's the response to the question that will be the problem. We'll see.
No, I think you answered it quite well. So the next question is, well, maybe a little bit more of a softball, coming from Hannah Cope from our chat. She asked, did you enjoy appearing on Joe Rogan's podcast last year? Any future appearances planned?
Yes, there is a future appearance planned. Joe owes me 2 appearances on my own program, but I haven't used it to blow myself up yet. Look, Joe's amazing. And one of the things that you get to do when you're hanging out with him, because he's an incredibly great guy to hang with, is you get to see, I'm going to blow his cover. He's an amazing mind. He pretends that he isn't. But one of the reasons that show works is that brain is something else. And, it's hard because it's not exactly in the idiom of most intellectuals. And if I were to call Joe an intellectual, he'd just make merciless fun out of me. So I'm not going to do it. But he's one of the smartest guys out there. And people just wonder, like, I don't get it. He's a meathead. He's a regular Joe. And he just has the biggest show in the world. It's like, do you think?
But doesn't that have something to do with what you said earlier about not staying in your lane? Just being able to do whatever you do want to do and whatever you're, interested in.
You are never more than a few clicks away from something that Joe knows a lot about. And that's one of the reasons that he can, just think about how many hours he's put out there on how many different topics. And how, like, the thing that I envy the most is his own ability to get out of the way of his guests when he'll steer them to something which makes them look good. And so in a weird way, he's that kind of, I don't know, that Larry Bird player that makes everyone else on the team play better. And so people like themselves better when they're on Joe's show, because in part you don't realize that you're getting this tremendous assist. And boy, could I use a tremendous assist. So yeah, I kind of love it.
That's and really good bourbon, I've been told, as well. That's what my sort of black cup. It's evening for me.
I never
here.
got the blunt,
and or the fire extinguisher with Englon. I see it. Fire extinguisher. No, the flamethrower.
Yeah.
That's right.
Actually, I think it's called not a flamethrower.
Exactly opposite. Fire extinguisher, the exact converse of a flamethrower. I got it. All right. So our last question, I feel I'll have our producer, because he's usually really embarrassed to come on screen, because he actually wrote the question. He actually wanted to have the question. I'm going to have him come on screen and ask it to you himself. Now look at him. He's getting ready. He's putting on his makeup. He's laughing at me, but Vic Chalfant, our producer, has a question for you. The last of it. There you go.
I was turning off my heater because I have a little space heater in here and I didn't want it making noise.
This is a very international show, by the way. I'm in Sweden. Vic, our producer, is in Arkansas, and Eric is coming from an undisclosed. Eric is coming from some undisclosed location somewhere in California. But I've seen you on the portal on your own podcast with that background before, so I think we know where it is. What's your question, Vic?
So I was just curious because I know you were a financial advisor and did a lot of that sort of stuff. And so I wondered what your take was on the Reddit GameStop stock boost that happened recently.
Well, it's very weird because, of course, hedge funds aren't necessarily hedge funds. They often have pension plans, but we hate the hedge fund managers so much that we're all sort of rooting. Even hedge fund managers are rooting to have other hedge fund managers take it on the chin. I think this is, there's a revolution afoot, and I've called it the N-squared revolution because before, recently, it wasn't kinetic. There wasn't that much street violence. We had some street violence this last year. People are pissed, and people have every right to be pissed. And one of the things that's got me most pissed off is listening to the establishment say, oh my God, the little people have discovered the fact that they can do what the big people do, which is manipulate markets. And it's like, hell yes, they're not the little people. We should have repossessed the Hamptons in 2008. No, I seriously, I called for turning it into Clawback National Seashore. And we should have all of these beautiful homes so you could tour them just like you're in Rhode Island, in Newport. In essence, we've got a kleptocratic elite, which are not elite at all. We keep calling them elite, and I don't know why we bother to do that. We're ruining the word elite. We have elite surgeons and elite special forces. These people aren't elite. They're gonoffs. They're chores. They're thieves. And in a certain sense,
frauds, you said.
well, you have to appreciate that in part, as you know, I had a hedge fund myself. We were trying to do things honestly, but we didn't even know who our value sources were. At some level, you see a trading pattern and you go after it, and the theory of the market is that all you're doing is making things more efficient. But the predatory institutions, the really big hedge funds, the really large investment banks, have a terrible culture. They've financialized our world, forced us all to go through them, and they have an idea that they're allowed to manipulate the markets, and we're not. And so I admit I was sort of, running around the house in my underwear cheering for these guys, not even knowing whether that really made sense or whether it was a good idea, just because I'm so interested in having some of these people take it on the chin. Yeah, right now I'm having my moment with the Bitcoin community where they need people to be their antagonists. So I'm not a Bitcoin. I'm not a Bitcoin critic the way they think I am, but their whole thing is like, Bitcoin doesn't need you. You need Bitcoin, and don't be a bullshitter. Show us your portfolio and all this kind of stuff.
Is Bitcoin going to be, or is it going to be the next one, or is it always going to be the second in line? Because it's always really good, at least in rock and roll, it's always good to be the second band.
Yeah. I think Bitcoin really has a special place because it's not trying to do more than what it is in a weird way. And my belief is that Bitcoin is really a play on the corruption of our institutional class. So you think about Janet Yellen versus Satoshi. Janet Yellen is yelling at Satoshi, and Satoshi, we don't even know who Satoshi is, right? Satoshi's just kicking Janet Yellen's ass, and that is exciting because what you have is this class of people who have a printing press. That's their major tool. They can change the law. They can prosecute you. They can print money, devalue the money that's already there. They can they can transfer wealth from person A to person B, claiming to be doing something like stimulus or relief. What the hell is relief or stimulus? It's transfers of wealth, right? Bitcoin is basically a discipline. It is what I've called the relationship with the unforgiving. Bitcoin is like the honey badger. Bitcoin doesn't give a shit. And that indifference, that cold-hearted indifference, is in part what is empowering the Bitcoiners. And yes, they're completely out of control and they're ridiculous and they're like bad children. On the other hand, they understood something that was really important, which is the main selling point of Bitcoin is the utterly undependable nature of our institutional class, which is thoroughly corrupt. And the more corrupt they are, the more Bitcoin is going to go up.
Well, I can tell you this, my Bitcoin investment has finally paid off all the debts that I had incurred trying to learn technical trading, which I, again, stepped away from because I found it wasn't for me. But, and I will still hold on to it because I do feel that it does have some sort of longevity, and
it could
we
go
shall see.
way, way higher than it is now.
Especially once it runs out, right? Once it's just a finite.
Think about it differently. Think about it as it's not, when you see the Bitcoin price, that's a two-sided thing. And the great value of it is you're short the dollar. And you know that these people don't know what they're doing at the Fed. The central bankers don't know what they're doing. So you know what they're going to do? They're going to print. And Bitcoin is in part valuable because it's not going to print. It's going to do what it's going to do on a regular schedule. And the confidence that you have that these people have one basic trick up their sleeve, which is seigniorage, the theft of, you're going to take money away from everyone who holds dollars and give it to whoever you give new dollars to just by running your printing press. And so that's sufficient to say that the Bitcoin price is really an exchange rate, and it's the fact that you're short the dollar that is animating BTC.
But there's no doubt that Elon's investment in Bitcoin, and I know, folks, this goes a little bit off the usually Fender and Gibson talk that we have weekly here, or rock and roll stories of tour buses. But it's more rock and roll and interesting to me just to talk about this with in a mind like Eric Weinstein. Elon's investment, to me, sort of leveraged his company so that his company wouldn't fail as well. Will there be other companies that do the same, which accept Bitcoin
Well,
pay?
he's using mimesis. He's using mimetic desire. So the idea that we want to ape Elon. Hey, Elon's got rockets. You know, rockets look like guitars. They're long and thin, right? You know, and he put a convertible into space, you know, with David Bowie playing in the background. Okay, so now the idea is we all want that kind of Elon cool, because really what we're trying to do is we want to make love to Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, you know. So at some level, he's using that mimetic desire to do what Bitcoin is going to do anyway. In other words, but by virtue of the fact that this thing is short the incompetence of our aging institutional class, Elon is helping it along. But I don't think Elon is central, unless he's Satoshi. I don't think he's central to the story.
Oh, shit.
All right, I see Kanak has a decent question. Should I post it? Well, Ryan may have dropped something. I'm willing to.
No, I dropped my microphone, you know, because I got so excited about, he is Satoshi, he is. But so Kanak is always, he helps out a lot with our putting out your sort of promo for our podcast today. Kanak is from India. Sir, would you like to share any advice for engineers, freshers who want to walk down the path of mathematics, stats, artificial intelligence, and maybe pursue a PhD or job in the same field?
Oh, boy. We both need you and we don't need you. And this is really the tough part. We need people to go into these fields, and we need these fields to pay really, really well because these skills are fungible. And right now, what we want to do is we want to exploit you. So don't let the market turn you into a subroutine so that somebody can snap their fingers and say, get me a rocket scientist, mathematician, data scientist. And then they'll give you what seems like a really nice salary for a young person, very little upside, and then they'll work you very hard, or they'll put you as a postdoc. We've got a huge problem. The thing to do is that we've got to bring science employers to their knees. And if we can do that, then you should go into these fields and work your ass off and try to accelerate the path by skipping over various steps. We teach you calculus way too many times. We teach you pre-calc, then we teach you calc A, B, B, C, then we do like single variable, multivariable, vector calculus, and real analysis. It's enough. We should effectively compress these sequences for people who can handle abstraction. Tell everybody else that we're going to give you a different version of the calculus. But people who can handle abstraction should be brought rapidly to the forefront. And so it's not such a crushing decision early in life. I think that it's very good if you want to become entrepreneurial. At the moment, very few things are working. And so the entrepreneurial avenue is one of the only things that is still working. But what we should do is we should make it safe for you to enter these fields, compressing the length of time it takes and making sure that you get paid shit tons of money by people who have gotten used to the idea that PhDs are a dime a dozen and a commodity, and that we can always flood the market whenever we need to make sure that they have no power at the bargaining table. So it's a very difficult recommendation. We need you, and we also clearly indicate that we don't want to pay you. And so it's a very dangerous thing to enter. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much. Kanak, just on my end, I do need you still to help promote the show like you do every single week. Thank you very much, as well as you, Federica. And you know you don't get paid a shit ton of money. Huh?
Do you have an Indian audience?
We have an international audience because the good people because Alice Cooper has commands an international audience. We have people, I think right now, if you want to sort of chime in on the chat, we have Australia represented, India represented, South America represented.
Specific question, because I've been on this Clubhouse app where my follower count is growing faster than Twitter by a good amount, and
exponentially, right? I know. Yeah. It just went zoom, right? You said something like 2.1 million.
Yeah, they were neck and neck like last month, where I've been stalled out below 500,000 on Twitter for a long time.
How did that crack how did you do that? Because it is an invite only app, and I just I got the invite a couple weeks ago, and then I just joined up, and I will obviously try. One
of the best things on that app is the South Asian music room. Okay. You have got kids from all over the Indian diaspora who are freestyling and riffing using Hindustani classical, Carnatic music, Bollywood as their well. And the instruments are slightly shifted. You know, you're going to get rabab, harmonium, sitar, santur, sarod. But what's going on there is so rich. And I just was hanging out with a bunch of them in a closed audio room where one of the gals started doing, they do the saregam thing where instead of do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, they do saregama, pa, da, ni, sa. And they sing and they scat with the actual note values. And she started riffing off of Dave Brubeck's Take 5. Because in part, these funny time signatures that to us are very much more understood and intuited because North Indian rhythm is the envy of the world. It's just the most advanced rhythmic system you'll ever find. And so in a weird way, I think that the whole thing that happened between like Ravi Shankar and Yehudi Menuhin only went so far. And then tabla beat science behind Zakir Hussain, arguably the greatest drummer of our time, was very interesting. But I think what these kids are going to do is these kids are going to take their knowledge of this alternate classical music, which is much closer to jazz because of the importance of mirror neurons and improvisation. And they're going to find more meaningful connections between East and West, between the bridge on an Indian instrument is curved to get it to buzz, that sitar sound.
Yes.
And so if you think about it's like natural distortion built in, and the ability to bend on a very high metal fret where you can both bend up and down, but you can also bend in because the frets, are really supporting the string.
My guitars do that every single winter in Sweden because of the humidity.
Well, but what I want to see is why is it that, like, do you have an idea of the top 10 Bollywood songs?
Absolutely not.
So this is a major missed opportunity. They're incredibly rich and interesting. The way in which the classical, and they've been mining us for years while we've been ignoring them.
True.
So I'm really excited about trying to get some of my music geeks. Maybe you'll come on the app. I'm going to try to get Rick Beato to do it. Maybe go after Adam Neely, and to try to get these diaspora South Asians in dialogue with rock and roll and find more meaningful connections than were found when we tried to pioneer this 50 years ago.
You should get our buddy Adam Reeder on as well. He's the professor of rock, and I'm not sure if you've ever gone on to YouTube and seen the professor of rock. Big shout out to him. Yeah, he's really great. So he would be another good one. I mean, look, I'm not intimidated. I'm not disheartened. I'm just schooled because you are friggin' schooling my ass on music today, and I love it because there's so many things I'm going to go back and watch the show myself, take some notes, the names that you have mentioned, plus these ideas, because you're exactly right. This is so many other cultures have been sort of studying American music,
Well,
and
but
we haven't.
We absorb it. Like if you think about Paint It Black, right? I see a red door and I want to paint it black. It lingers a half step below what I think the tonic would be, and it stays there comfortably, you know, which is like, it's a little weird. And it has that kind of Indian, you know.
Yeah, but that's just one harmonic minor scale with those guys.
Right. But then like even a very simplistic thing like the James Bond theme is actually taken from a failed musical for V.S. Naipaul's A House for Mr. Biswas. And originally its lyrics were, I was born with an unlucky sneeze, and what is worse, I came into this world the wrong way around. Like the whole thing is clearly Indian, and you've never realized that what animates like all that spy music with all of these chromatic tricks, you know, blues and chromaticism. In that case, what you're really hearing is a sort of an Indian sensibility or a Middle Eastern or gypsy sensibility, which is like, you know, coming from the Miserlou. Miserlou is very close to Hava Nagila, right? With that oriental second between the flat second and the major third.
Yeah,
Right.
those half steps. Yes, like you say, those chromatic half steps.
And then the way in which these guys interleave the major and minor tonalities. So there's this whole system, like you were talking about the harmonic minor. The fact that there are different versions of the minor that are different as you go up, as you go down, they call this a row of row, where the scale changes, the raga changes depending on which direction you're going. And so I really think that in part, rather than treating this as a novelty, we should be mining this as a huge source of ideas. And it just, for some reason, hasn't happened yet.
Wow. And you know what? All my favorite solos come from 5 notes, the pentatonic. Well, at least the ones that I've written as well.
Well, but I bet they don't. I mean, I think that one of the things that's so beautiful is if you look at who's this guy, Jacob Collier in the UK. So he's focusing us on the fact that it's absolutely essential to realize that we're imprisoned by 12 tones. So you have this 12-week system.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, it's a 12 system because there is only 12 notes in.
But why?
Okay, you're going to tell me that. Well, because
why 12?
Okay, because there's 12 notes on the guitar neck. Now I know you can bend it. Okay,
why are there 12 notes?
Starting from your open string all the way up to those double dots, and that actually simplifies the guitar neck for many people.
It's the 12th root of 2 that is causing this to happen. In other words, it is peculiar to the 12th root of 2 that if you take 19 of those increments, that's almost exactly equal to 3. It's just below the value of 3. And that's only true for like 12 and 53. There's a 53 notes gives you an almost perfect fifth. So the real rule is that you have to have perfect octaves, and you have to have something so close to a perfect fifth that you can call it a perfect fifth, even though that's a total lie. And 12 is the magic value. I think 29 is the next value that gives you a very weird approximation to the perfect fifth, and then 53. And that 29 gives you a worse third. Our third is so far off. The reason that blue third, you talk about the pentatonic where you're bending that minor third, is the Pythagorean tone is between the major third and the minor third. It's closer to the major third, but it's really far away. Our ear can hear that difference. It's sour. And that's why that
you see what happens when I get a mathematician on my show that just blows up my system 12.
Vic, can you take 2, raise it to the 19th power, and take the 12th root of that on a computer?
He's shaking his head completely. No, I love it.
But we don't even realize why 12.
Yeah. Now I know. Now I know it's increments of 12, 29, and 53. Folks, stay tuned for my next 29th system.
You see, with 53, you can make a fortune.
Working my way up. All right. So we are now heading out to the highway. There it is. There, Kanak again is he's giving you some back and forth. Yes. And I don't know if he's correcting you or not correcting you at this point.
He's giving me the Hindi or the Sanskrit. I'm not sure which.
I love it. So there it is, folks. we have spent some really quality time with Eric Weinstein. No, we've actually learned. I've learned a lot. Hopefully, you've learned my very simple thing of why I'm left-handed and play guitar traditional.
That was great.
Okay. I hope that's your takeaway. I have too many takeaways to actually have. This is called Heading Out to the Highway. If you can, obviously, with 2.1 million Clubhouse followers and YouTube followers, you don't need everybody to come on board. But I think a lot of people in our chat would like to find out more about you. What's the best way to get in touch with Eric Weinstein?
I leave my DMs open. It's not very responsible of me, and I don't answer or read every one, but I try to sample them. And, the other thing is to go to I think, ericweinstein.org and leave us your email address. I think there's a Facebook group for the portal, which I have not been doing very actively. There's really only me, so there isn't an organization behind it. But if you will attempt to send me a DM or to sign up at ericweinstein.org and find the portal.wiki, gives you an idea of some of the crazy things that we're into. And we would, one of the reasons we were eager to do Ryan's show is that it's incredibly important to support our musicians during what has been a brutal year where people can't really easily charge for their music and they can't easily tour. And it's so important for people who are actually still playing instruments and who still have the love to keep this thing going, so that it doesn't all become formula and computer and the market. So this is just out of a gratitude for. I can't believe a guitarist this talented saw me on Instagram screwing around with a little bit of blues and invited me on the show. And so I wanted to say thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you on. And the future for you is writing songs. You did mention that a little bit. Can we look forward to some sort of release coming out?
I don't know how to do a release. So if you don't mind giving me an idea of how one of the songs I can't really even play because it's above my ability to actually pull it off. But I would love to talk to you privately, and maybe you'll help that along the way and be a midwife.
Would love to. And if you need a guest solo or anything like that, I would definitely be honored. Awesome. So Eric Weinstein, hang on the list for just 1 second. And folks, honestly, this has been, of all the episodes I've done in the Trenches, which is a musical podcast, this has been the most musical talk that we've had of our guests. And I love it. And I really had a good time doing it. Next week, we do have, if Vic has that shot up. Oh, he does not have the shot up, but we do have Susie Quattro coming on next Tuesday. Yeah, so maybe Eric will come back for that at one point. But I appreciate you can find Eric Weinstein, especially if you get into Clubhouse as well. I will probably be there a little bit later on in the evening. As always, folks, appreciate you guys supporting the show. Appreciate you guys supporting everything we do with System 12 and everything at the RGA. Again, if you can subscribe to that YouTube official show, you've been hanging out with myself, Ryan Roxie, and our guest, Eric Weinstein. Until next time, folks, enjoy the ride. Have a great one.
In the Trenches with Ryan Roxie.